Like I had a professor who said that I revised with a blowtorch. I'll cut a character, I'll cut a plot line, I'll, set it in a different time period. I first got the idea for the Vanishing Half maybe in 2015, 2016, and I was talking to my mom on the phone one day, and she mentioned to me very offhandedly about this town that she remembered hearing about when she was growing up, where everyone was really light-skinned. And that immediately struck me as really fascinating and as the potential setting for a novel. And I started to think about twin sisters who grew up in that place and take two very different paths in life, one who decides to live as Black and one who decides to live as white. So early on, I was really fascinated by the idea of this place and by the idea of these characters. And I think that was basically all I knew before I started writing. I didn't really plan all of the other plot lines. I didn't know about the other characters. It was really through writing it that I realized that I was writing this multi-generational story that was going to involve the twins and their sisters and the men in their lives. That was something that I only discovered once I started writing. The story changed a lot as I was writing on it. Like I said, I knew I wanted to start with the twins. I knew they were going to go their separate directions and that I was going to follow them and their choices that they made. I had no idea when I first started writing that it was going to be multi-generational and that I would want to go into the point of views of their daughters. I had no idea that the book was going to take such a large span of time. I thought it would mostly be set in the 60s and 70s, but the book ends up going into sort of a more contemporary time period. I just did not know the book was going to be as sprawling as it eventually became, where we would follow these characters in different cities and different parts of the country in different eras, different time periods. So it definitely expanded as I was working on it. It expanded far beyond these twin sisters who were the first characters that came to my mind. But I had a lot of fun following these characters throughout their lives. I had a lot of fun meeting these other people in their lives and seeing how the story would just unfold and continue to get bigger. As far as my writing process goes, I definitely am on my computer. I do not write longhand at all. I think that I used to be a coffee shop writer. Now I work out of an office, so I've tried to have a little bit more structure than sort of my days of just wandering into a random coffee shop. But yeah, I like to write in the morning for sure. I think that's when I'm most alert and most prepared. But I also sometimes like to write a little bit into the late afternoon, and I will sometimes use that time to like experiment or try something different, because I feel like that time doesn't really count. Like if I write something towards the end of the day and it's bad, I can just like not think about it the next day. So I've tried to use time differently, I guess, in those ways. But yeah, I'm not someone who outlines. I'm not someone who really plans or has a lot of structure. I really just try to think about being a kid in the sandbox and playing with the Barbies and moving them around and deciding what I'm going to do on the fly. And then when it comes to revision, it definitely takes me a lot of drafts to try to figure out and how to shape all of the chaos that I've sort of wrought on the page. So I'm definitely someone who revises very intently and very thoroughly. And that's usually what I spend most of my time doing, is trying to kind of create coherence out of what I wrote very freely. But for me, it's very important to have that freedom when I'm drafting and when I'm creating, to feel like anything can go, anything can happen. I think to me, that's the most important thing to allow myself to be, is that feeling of playing and that feeling of being free. I think the research for this book was really interesting because, the research around racial passing, it's sort of this incomplete record. Like there's an idea that, in a sense, it's sort of like faking your death, where if you passed successfully, then nobody would know that you had done it. So then how do you go about sort of researching and actually finding the experiences of people who do not want to be found by definition of what they are doing? So it was an interesting process. I definitely read books. There's a book called A Chosen Exile by Allison Hobbs that I really loved, and that was about the history of racial passing in America. And there were other books and other sort of nonfiction texts that I tried to find to locate the experiences of some people, what they had to sacrifice, what it was like for people to undergo that. Where I could find that paper trail, I definitely went looking for it and tried to sort of ground it into that historical research. And then also I did a lot of reading about some of these Creole towns that I was writing about that were like Mallard, where people were very light-skinned living there. So I did research to some of those towns. researching. I think it was a difficult book in a lot of ways to write because I was writing about a lot of characters who were unlike me in a time period in which I was not alive. So it required a lot of sort of reading primary sources, reading sometimes fiction that was related to the topic. So read a lot of fiction about passing, and then these sort of nonfiction, more historical texts in order to have just context for what these characters might have been experiencing. I don't know if this is unusual. I just think the thing that has always been true of me, even when I was in grad school, was just how dramatically I revised from draft to draft. Like, I had a professor who said that I revised with a blowtorch. I think that is true for, like, I don't recommend it. I don't think it's, like, I'm not proud of it, but I do think that I will cut, in this book, I got rid of a character. Like, I'll cut a character, I'll cut a plot line, I'll, set it in a different time period. I will make these really huge changes from draft to draft because I don't feel a lot of preciousness about it. I feel like I feel very comfortable going through and making a dramatic change. And I acknowledge that often makes life harder for myself and probably my editor. But also I like the idea of not being wedded to your own bad ideas and for being open to the fact that, maybe this was not as good as it seemed in your head. Maybe this actually isn't working. Maybe this character is getting in the way of the story that you actually want to tell, and you have to sort of, kill your darlings, as they say. So I think that is a thing that I think has been true about me since I was in school, of just feeling a sort of brutality towards my drafts and a willingness to make dramatic changes from draft to draft. Yeah, the twins originally had a brother, and this was a character that I just really loved. I felt deep tenderness towards him, and he was in a very early draft of the book, but eventually I realized that brother was sort of blocking the relationships that I was really interested in, because Desiree would talk to the brother instead of talking to her mother, or, there was like a way that he was kind of getting in between characters that I wanted to force together. And I was so much more interested in Desiree's relationship with her mother or Desiree's relationship with her sister. And this guy, although I really loved him, was kind of getting in the way of that. So that was a character that I just fully cut. And yeah, I had a lot of love and tenderness for him, and maybe he'll belong in a different book. But I realized that he was getting in the way of the book that I wanted to write. And I had to have that kind of, brutal willingness to get rid of this person that I had spent some time with, but realizing that he was kind of preventing the book from being what I ultimately wanted it to be.